The phone buzzed against the nightstand at 2:47 a.m., its pale glow cutting through the darkness of the bedroom like a surgical blade. Sarah Collins opened her eyes before the second vibration, her body conditioned by years of late-night calls that never brought good news. The ceiling fan rotated slowly above her, doing little to combat the oppressive August heat that clung to Atlanta like a second skin. Even with the air conditioning running, the humidity found its way inside, settling into the walls and the sheets and the heavy air that refused to move. She reached for the phone. Unknown number. Her thumb hovered over the decline button, but something made her stop. Instinct, perhaps. The same instinct that had kept her alive through 12 years on the force and 6 years leading the K-9 unit. She answered. Lieutenant Collins. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. The voice on the other end was male, middle-aged, trembling with barely contained fear. Lieutenant, my name is Richard Pace. I'm the night manager at the Avalon Grand Hotel on Peachtree Street. I need you to come here, now, tonight. Sarah sat up, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. Across the room, a pair of amber eyes caught the faint light from the window. Max lifted his head from his bed in the corner, ears already pricked forward, reading her body language with the precision of a seasoned partner. 7 years together had taught them to communicate without words. Mr. Pace, if you have an emergency, you need to call 911. I can give you the direct line to... No! The word came out sharp, desperate. No other officers, no dispatch, no records. You need to see what I found on our security footage. It involves people who have friends in your department. Friends who would make this disappear before you could blink. Sarah's jaw tightened. She had heard variations of this pitch before. Paranoid citizens, conspiracy theorists, people who watched too many crime dramas and thought every shadow hid a government plot. But there was something in this man's voice that gave her pause. Not paranoia, terror. What exactly did you see, Mr. Pace? A long pause. She could hear him breathing, could almost feel him looking over his shoulder through the phone. Senator Morrison, 3 nights ago. He met with people in our penthouse suite, people I recognized from the news, from federal indictments. They exchanged briefcases, Lieutenant. They shook hands like old friends. And then yesterday, I get a call from hotel ownership telling me to delete all footage from that night. A direct order from someone who has never once contacted me in my 8 years here. Sarah stood. Max rose with her, silent and alert, his dark coat barely visible in the shadows. Did you delete it? I made a copy first, but Lieutenant, someone knows, someone has to know. There have been cars parked outside my apartment. A man followed me to work tonight. I can feel them closing in, and I don't know who else to trust. I looked up officers who have stood against corruption before. Your name came up. That case 3 years ago, the evidence tampering in the gang unit. You didn't back down even when they threatened your career. Sarah remembered. She also remembered the 6 months of administrative leave, the cold shoulders from colleagues, the way her own chief had looked at her like she was a traitor to the badge. She had been right, and it had cost her nearly everything. Why me specifically? Why not the FBI, the GBI, someone with jurisdiction over political corruption? Because I don't know who's been bought. Morrison has been in office for 22 years. 22 years of favors and connections, and God knows what else. The FBI field office here has dined at his fundraisers. I can't trust anyone in a suit. But you're a cop who works with a dog. You chase criminals through alleys, not golf courses. You're not part of their world. It was twisted logic, but Sarah understood it. The insulation of her position, the distance from the political machinery, might actually be an asset here, or it might get her killed. If what you're saying is true, coming to you alone is exactly what they would want me to do. This could be a setup, Mr. Pace. I know, His voice cracked. "I know how it sounds, but I'm going to be at the hotel until 6 a.m. regardless. Room 1847. I'll leave the service elevator unlocked from the parking garage. If you come, I'll show you everything. If you don't, I'll have to find another way. But, Lieutenant, I don't think I have much time left to figure out another way." The line went dead. Sarah stood in the darkness of her bedroom, the phone growing warm in her hand, the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. Every protocol, every regulation, every lesson from the academy screamed at her to call this in, to wake up her captain, to request backup, to do this by the book. But she had seen what the book got you when powerful people were involved. The book got evidence lost. The book got witnesses intimidated. The book got cases closed and files sealed and justice delayed until it became indistinguishable from injustice. Max padded over to her, his nose brushing against her hand. She looked down at him, at the intelligence gleaming in those amber eyes, at the coiled readiness in his muscular frame. He was asking her a question without words. She gave him the only answer she had. "Let's go, boy." 20 minutes later, Sarah's unmarked sedan rolled through the empty streets of downtown Atlanta. The city was never truly asleep, but at 3 in the morning, it came close. The skyscrapers stood like silent sentinels against a sky that glowed orange from the urban light pollution, blotting out any stars that might have offered guidance. The heat had not broken with nightfall. If anything, the concrete and asphalt had absorbed the day's punishment and were now radiating it back, turning the streets into corridors of warm, stale air. She had dressed in plain clothes, dark jeans, a lightweight black jacket over a grey t-shirt, her badge clipped to her belt beside her service weapon. Nothing that screamed cop, but nothing that would slow her down if things went wrong. Max sat in the back seat, his harness secured, his body still but his eyes tracking every movement outside the windows. He knew this was not a routine call. He could feel the tension in her shoulders, could smell the adrenaline beginning to seep through her skin. The Avalon Grand Hotel rose 23 stories above Peachtree Street, a monument to old Atlanta money dressed in modern glass and steel. Sarah had been inside once before, years ago, for a security consultation after a series of high-profile thefts from hotel safes across the city. She remembered the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the staff trained to be invisible until needed. It was the kind of place where discretion was the most valuable amenity, where secrets were kept as carefully as the wine cellar. She parked in the underground garage, finding a spot near the service elevator as instructed. The garage was nearly empty at this hour, just a scattering of luxury vehicles belonging to overnight guests and a few service vans tucked into the corners. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made the shadows seem darker by contrast. Sarah killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the silence. Max's ears rotated like satellite dishes, picking up frequencies she could not hear. After a moment, he let out a low sound, not quite a growl, more of an observation. Something was off. He could sense it, and she had learned long ago to trust his senses more than her own. She clipped his lead to his tactical harness and stepped out of the car. The air in the garage was thick and still, carrying the faint smell of exhaust and concrete dust. Their footsteps echoed as they made their way to the service elevator, the sound bouncing off the low ceiling and returning to them like whispered warnings. The elevator door was unlocked, just as Pace had promised. Sarah pressed the button for the 18th floor and felt the car begin its ascent. Max stood beside her, his body pressed against her leg, his breathing slow and controlled. He was in work mode now, every muscle primed, every sense focused. Whatever waited for them above, they would face it together. The doors opened onto a carpeted hallway, silent and deserted. The walls were papered in a muted gold pattern, punctuated by sconces that cast warm pools of light at regular intervals. Room numbers in brass plates marked each door. Sarah moved down the hall with practiced stealth, her footsteps making no sound on the thick carpet, Max gliding beside her like a shadow with teeth. Room 1847 was at the end of the corridor, near the emergency stairs. Sarah paused outside the door, her hand raised to knock, when Max suddenly went rigid. His head turned toward the stairwell, his nostrils flaring, a low rumble building in his chest. Someone was coming. Sarah drew her weapon and pressed herself against the wall, motioning for Max to hold. The stairwell door was 15 feet away, its small window dark. She could hear nothing, but Max's reaction told her everything she needed to know. Seconds stretched into eternities as she waited, her finger resting alongside the trigger guard, her breath shallow and controlled. The door to 1847 opened. Richard Pace stood in the doorway, his face pale and sheened with sweat, his eyes wide with a fear that had clearly been building for days. He was in his 50s, slight of build, with thinning grey hair and the rumpled appearance of a man who had not slept in far too long. When he saw Sarah, relief washed over his features, followed immediately by confusion when he noticed her stance, her weapon, her attention fixed on the stairwell. "Lieutenant?" "What?" "Inside, now, quietly." She did not wait for him to comply, pushing past him into the room with Max at her heels. The room was a standard hotel suite, elegantly appointed but clearly serving as a makeshift command center. A laptop sat open on the desk, its screen displaying frozen security footage. Papers were scattered across every surface. Printouts, notes, what looked like financial documents. Pace had been doing more than just watching footage. He had been building a case. Sarah closed the door behind them and locked it, then moved to the window to check the street below. Nothing unusual, just the empty sidewalk and the orange glow of streetlights. "Mr. Pace," Max alerted to something in the stairwell. "Is there another way someone could access this floor?" Pace's face went even paler. "The service stairs, but they require a key card. Only staff have—" He stopped, realization dawning. They could have gotten a card. If they have people inside the hotel, they could have gotten anything. "Who is they, Mr. Pace? Who exactly are we dealing with?" He moved to the laptop, his hands trembling as he pulled up a file. "I've been looking into Morrison for months, ever since I noticed irregularities in the booking system. Rooms being reserved under false names, paid for in cash, no record of the guests ever using any hotel services. It didn't make sense until I started cross-referencing the dates with Morrison's public schedule. Every time he was supposedly at a conference or a fundraiser out of state, he was actually here, in our penthouse. The footage on the screen showed a timestamp from 3 nights ago. Sarah watched as a man she recognized from countless news broadcasts, Senator David Morrison, silver-haired and distinguished, the picture of Southern political aristocracy, stepped out of a private elevator and into a suite. He was followed by 4 other men, their faces less familiar, but their bearing unmistakable. These were not politicians. These were soldiers, enforcers. "I ran their faces through every database I could access," Pace continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. 2 of them are connected to the Marchetti family out of New York. 1 is a known associate of a cartel operating out of Miami. The 4th I couldn't identify, but the way the others deferred to him, he's clearly in charge of something. Sarah watched as briefcases were exchanged, as hands were shaken, as men who should have been enemies sat down together like old business partners. The implications were staggering. A sitting state senator conducting business with organized crime in one of Atlanta's most prestigious hotels. This was not just corruption. This was a network. A machine that had been operating in plain sight for years, maybe decades. "You made a copy of this?" Pace reached into his pocket and produced a small USB drive. "Everything. The footage, the booking records, the financial irregularities, it's all here." I was going to take it to someone tomorrow, but after the cars outside my apartment, after being followed, I realized I might not make it to tomorrow. Sarah took the drive, feeling its insignificant weight in her palm, such a small thing to contain so much potential destruction. She slipped it into her jacket pocket and turned to face Pace. We need to get you out of here, now. Whatever they have planned, they'll move soon. You coming forward with this evidence puts a target on both our backs. As if in answer to her words, the lights went out. The darkness was absolute, the kind of blackness that pressed against your eyes and made you question whether you had ever really seen anything at all. Sarah's hand found Max's harness instinctively, feeling the vibration of his low growl against her fingers. He could see better than her in this. He could smell what she could not, hear what she was deaf to. "Mr. Pace, stay behind me. Don't make a sound." She pulled out her phone, using its dim screen to navigate toward the door. Before she could reach it, Max suddenly pivoted, his body swinging toward the window. A second later, Sarah heard it too. The distant thrum of a helicopter growing louder, accompanied by the faint whine of a spotlight, sweeping across the building's facade. They were not just cutting the power, they were surrounding the hotel. Sarah's mind raced through the options. The elevators would be dead. The main stairs would be watched. If they had people inside the hotel, and the ease with which they had killed the power suggested they did, every obvious exit would be compromised. 23 floors of hotel between her and the street, filled with shadows and threats she could not see. But she was not alone. She had Max. And Max had never let her down. "Mr. Pace, is there a way to the roof from this floor? The service stairs go all the way up, but nothing. That helicopter is looking for us at ground level. They expect us to go down, so we go up." She moved to the door, pressing her ear against it, listening. Nothing. Max was focused on the hallway beyond, his body language indicating tension, but not immediate threat. The danger was there, but not yet at their door. Sarah eased the door open an inch, then two, peering into the blackness of the hallway. The emergency lighting should have kicked in by now, but it hadn't. Someone had disabled the backup systems as well. This was professional work, thorough and ruthless. "Stay close. Don't speak. Follow my lead." They moved into the corridor, 3 figures in the darkness. Sarah in front, weapon drawn, the phone tucked away to preserve her night vision. Max beside her, his senses extending into the void like invisible tripwires. Pace behind them both, his breathing ragged with fear but his footsteps mercifully quiet. The service stairs were 20 feet ahead. Sarah had just closed half that distance when Max suddenly froze, his body going rigid, his head turning sharply to the left. A moment later, she heard it, the soft click of a door opening somewhere behind them, followed by the whisper of footsteps on carpet. They had company. Sarah grabbed Pace's arm and pulled him forward, abandoning stealth for speed. They reached the stairwell door, and she pushed through, the heavy fire door swinging shut behind them with a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. The stairs stretched above and below them, a concrete canyon lit only by the faint glow of emergency exit signs that had somehow survived the power cut. "Up!" she hissed. "Move!" They climbed, 1 flight, then 2, then 3. Sarah's legs burning with the effort, her ears straining for sounds of pursuit. Max bounded ahead, then circled back, a constant guardian checking their path before they walked it. The rhythm was grueling. Climb, pause, listen, climb again, but it was keeping them alive. By the time they reached the 20th floor, Sarah knew they could not make it to the roof. Pace was struggling, his age and sedentary lifestyle betraying him, his breath coming in ragged gasps that echoed up and down the stairwell. Worse, she could hear movement below them now, multiple sets of footsteps ascending with a steady, unhurried confidence that spoke of men who knew their prey was tiring. She pulled open the door to the 20th floor and guided Pace through. Max slipping past to scout the hallway beyond. This floor was different from the 18th. Wider corridors, larger rooms, the subtle indicators of luxury that increased with altitude. The penthouse level was above them, but this was where the wealthy guests stayed, the ones who wanted space and privacy, but not the ostentation of the top floor. "We need to find a room," Sarah whispered, "somewhere to hide while I figure out our next move." Pace nodded weakly, sweat dripping from his face. "There should be vacant rooms. I can check the system, but without power. We do it the old-fashioned way." Sarah moved down the hall, testing door handles as she went. The first 3 were locked. The 4th gave way, opening into a darkened suite that smelled of fresh linen and lemon polish. No luggage, no personal items, no indication of occupancy. She pulled Pace inside and closed the door behind them, engaging the deadbolt and the security chain for whatever minimal protection they might offer. The suite was large, with a sitting area, a bedroom, and a bathroom visible through an open door. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated the far wall, offering a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. The city glittered below them, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the darkened hotel. The helicopter she had heard earlier was circling somewhere to the north, its spotlight probing the streets rather than the building itself. They were not searching for escapees yet. They were establishing a perimeter. Sarah guided Pace to a chair in the corner, away from the windows, and crouched beside him. Max took up a position near the door, his ears tracking every sound in the hallway beyond. "Mr. Pace, I need you to think clearly. Is there anyone in this hotel you trust? Anyone who might help us?" He shook his head, despair clouding his features. "I don't know anymore. I thought I knew these people. I've worked with some of them for years, but if someone gave them a key card, if someone helped cut the power, then I don't know who." He stopped abruptly, his eyes widening. "Martinez, Elena Martinez. She works in housekeeping, 3rd shift. She's been here almost as long as I have, and she's always been suspicious of the ownership group. Last year, she came to me with concerns about guests who never seemed to use room service or housekeeping. Rooms that were marked as occupied, but showed no signs of life. I told her not to worry about it, that it was above our pay grade. But she kept asking questions. If anyone would help us, it might be her." "Where would she be now?" "Housekeeping staff use the basement level during overnight shifts. There's a break room, a supply area. If she's still in the building, that's where she'd be. The basement, 20 floors below them, past every obstacle and enemy between here and there. It seemed impossible, but Sarah had learned long ago that impossible was just a word people used when they could not see the path forward. "Okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay here out of sight and keep absolutely silent. Max and I are going to find another way down. Locate Martinez and see if she can help us get out of this building without walking into an ambush." Pace grabbed her arm, panic flashing in his eyes. "You can't leave me here. If they find me, if I take you with me, we'll both be dead before we reach the 16th floor. You're not trained for this, Mr. Pace. I am. Max is. Trust us to do our jobs, and we'll come back for you." She held his gaze until she saw acceptance replace fear, then nodded and moved toward the door. Max fell into step beside her, his body language shifting into operational mode, every fiber of his being focused on the task ahead. Sarah paused at the door, listening. The hallway beyond was silent, but silence in a hunted building was not reassuring. It just meant the predators were being patient. She eased the door open and slipped out, Max flowing through the gap behind her. The corridor stretched in both directions, identical in its darkness, its plush carpet muffling every footstep. She chose left, moving toward the far stairwell, the one she had not used to ascend. Varying her route was the only way to stay unpredictable. They had covered perhaps 30 feet when Max suddenly stopped, His nose working the air, his tail going rigid. Sarah froze, her weapon coming up, her eyes straining to penetrate the blackness ahead. Then she saw it, a silhouette, barely visible against the marginally lighter shade of a window at the end of the hall. A man, standing motionless, facing away from her. He had not seen them yet. He was watching the stairwell door, waiting for his prey to walk into his trap. Sarah considered her options. Taking him down quietly was possible but risky. If he had a radio, if he managed to alert his companions before she could subdue him, everything would collapse. But leaving him there meant he would eventually turn around, eventually spot them, eventually raise the alarm anyway. Max solved the problem for her. On some unspoken signal that Sarah never fully understood, the dog moved. 65 pounds of muscle and teeth crossed the distance between them and the guard, in absolute silence, closing the gap before the man's brain could register the threat. Max hit him low, taking out his legs with surgical precision, and the man went down without a sound, except for the muffled thump of his body hitting the carpet. Before he could recover, before he could cry out, Sarah was there, her knee on his chest, her weapon pressed against his temple. "Make a noise and it's your last," she breathed. "Nod if you understand." The man nodded. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with a military bearing and a tactical vest that bulged with equipment. Professional, just as she had suspected, but professionals could be controlled if you applied the right pressure. "How many of you are in the building?" His eyes darted to Max, who stood inches from his face, teeth bared in a silent snarl that promised violence. 8, maybe 10. I don't know the exact number. Duh. Where are they positioned? Stairwells, lobby, parking garage. 2 teams sweeping floor by floor. Who's running the operation? The man hesitated, and Max leaned closer, a low growl vibrating in his throat. The man's resolve crumbled. "I don't know his name. We just call him Control. He's not here. He's coordinating remotely." "Senator Morrison. Is he involved?" Something flickered in the man's eyes. Fear, certainly, but also something else. Surprise, perhaps, that she knew the name. "I don't know anything about a senator. We're private security. We got a contract to secure the building and detain anyone who accessed the 18th floor tonight." "Detain? Is that what you call it?" The man said nothing. He did not have to. They both knew what detain meant in this context. Sarah pulled a set of zip ties from the man's own vest and secured his hands behind his back, then used a strip of duct tape from his pocket to seal his mouth. She dragged him into the nearest room, another vacant suite, and left him in the bathtub, where it would take him time to maneuver even if he managed to free himself. Back in the hallway, she oriented herself and continued toward the far stairwell. Max moved slightly ahead now, his confidence boosted by the successful takedown, his senses on high alert for the next threat. They reached the stairwell door without further incident and slipped through into the concrete canyon beyond. Going down was faster than going up, but more dangerous. Gravity wanted to pull them into traps, into ambushes, into the waiting arms of men who had anticipated their descent. Sarah moved one flight at a time, pausing at each landing to listen, to let Max assess the air, to look for shadows that moved in ways shadows should not move. They made it to the 15th floor before trouble found them again. The door to the stairwell burst open just as Sarah and Max crossed the landing, revealing 2 men in identical tactical gear to the one they had subdued. For a frozen moment, everyone stared at each other, surprise registering on faces that should have been prepared for anything. Then, everything happened at once. The first man raised his weapon. Max launched himself forward, covering the distance in a single bound and slamming into the man's chest before his finger could find the trigger. They went down in a tangle of limbs and fur and snarling teeth, the weapon clattering away into the darkness. The second man swung toward Sarah, his own gun tracking toward her center mass. She was already moving, dropping beneath his aim, her legs sweeping out to take his feet from under him. He hit the landing hard, the breath exploding from his lungs, and Sarah was on him before he could recover. Her elbow found his temple with practiced precision, and he went limp. Max had subdued his opponent with equal efficiency, the man pinned beneath 65 pounds of furry justice. Whimpering softly, as teeth pressed against his throat without quite breaking the skin, Sarah secured both men quickly, zip ties and tape, then dragged them into a supply closet on the 15th floor. They were running out of time. Every encounter increased the chances that someone would report in, that Control would realize his teams were being picked off, that the net would tighten until there was no escape. But they were also making progress. 12 floors to go. The next 8 floors passed in a blur of tension and controlled movement. Twice more, Max alerted to threats before Sarah could detect them, allowing them to avoid patrols rather than confront them. Once, they hid in a laundry chute for nearly 10 minutes while a team swept the floor above them, their voices echoing through the walls, their frustration evident as they failed to find their quarry. When they finally reached the basement level, Sarah's legs were burning, her nerves frayed, her admiration for Max's endurance greater than ever. The dog had not flagged once, had not hesitated, had not given any sign that this was anything other than another day at work. He was, she thought for the 100th time, the best partner she had ever had. The basement was a maze of utility corridors, storage rooms, and staff areas that the guests never saw. This was the hidden infrastructure of the hotel, the machinery that kept the illusion of effortless luxury running. Sarah navigated by memory, recalling the layout from her security consultation years ago, trusting that the basic structure had not changed. The housekeeping break room was at the far end of a corridor, lined with industrial washing machines and carts stacked with fresh linens. A faint light glowed from beneath the door, a flashlight or a phone, someone using whatever illumination they could find in the blackout. Sarah approached cautiously, Max at her side, and knocked softly on the door. Elena Martinez. A pause. The light shifted. Then a voice, accented and suspicious. "Who's asking?" "Lieutenant Sarah Collins, Atlanta PD. I'm with the K9 unit. Richard Pace sent me." Another pause, longer this time. Then the door cracked open, revealing a woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, and eyes that held both fear and defiance. She looked at Sarah, then at Max, then back at Sarah. "Richard said he was going to find help. I told him he was being paranoid. He wasn't." Martinez absorbed this, then stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in, quickly!" The break room was small and cluttered, with a table surrounded by plastic chairs, a row of lockers against one wall, and a counter holding a coffee maker and microwave that were both useless without power. Martinez had a flashlight propped on the table, casting long shadows across the room. 2 other women were there, both in housekeeping uniforms, both looking terrified. "These are Maria and Linda," Martinez said, gesturing to her co-workers. "We've been hiding here since the power went out. We heard men moving through the building, checking rooms, and we knew something was wrong. This isn't a normal blackout." "No, it's not." Sarah gave them a brief summary of the situation, enough to explain the danger without overwhelming them with details they did not need. When she finished, Martinez's jaw was set with grim determination. "I always knew there was something wrong with this place. The ownership, the guests who never seemed like real guests, the rooms that housekeeping was never allowed to enter. I should have pushed harder. You can help now. I need to get Pace out of this building and get the evidence he collected to someone who can act on it. But every exit is being watched. Is there another way out? Something that isn't on the official plans?" Martinez thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. There might be. When they did renovations 3 years ago, they sealed off an old service tunnel that used to connect to the building next door. It was supposed to be for deliveries back in the day, before they built the loading dock. The tunnel is still there. They just walled off the entrance. Where? Storage room E at the end of the east corridor. But the wall they put up is solid. You'd need tools to get through. Sarah looked around the break room, her eyes landing on a maintenance cart in the corner. What's on that cart? Basic supplies, cleaning equipment, a few hand tools for minor repairs. Sarah crossed to the cart and rummaged through its contents. A hammer, a pry bar, a heavy-duty screwdriver. Not ideal, but workable. She gathered the tools and turned back to Martinez. I need you to do something for me. In about 30 minutes, I want you to trigger the fire alarm. The manual pull station should work even without main power. The alarm will create chaos. Give Pace and me cover to move. Can you do that? Martinez hesitated, then nodded. 30 minutes. I can do that. Thank you. All of you stay hidden until this is over. Once the alarm goes off, the men searching the building will have to deal with evacuation protocols, responding fire crews, witnesses. They won't be able to operate in the shadows anymore. She moved toward the door, then paused. Martinez, if we don't make it out, if something goes wrong, I need you to call this number. She wrote quickly on a scrap of paper. Ask for Detective James Warren, Atlanta PD Homicide. Tell him everything you know. He's the only person in the department I trust completely. Martinez took the paper, her eyes meeting Sarah's. I'll make the call, but you're going to make it out. I can see it in your face and in your dog's. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Max has never let me down. The journey back up was somehow worse than the journey down. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound more ominous, every step closer to discovery. But Sarah moved with renewed purpose, the tools clinking softly against her leg, the weight of the mission pressing her forward. They reached the 20th floor without incident and found Pace exactly where they had left him, huddled in the corner of the darkened suite, his eyes wide with terror that melted into relief when he saw them. Thank God. I heard people in the hallway, footsteps, voices. I thought, you're safe, but we need to move now. She explained the plan as they made their way to the stairwell, keeping her voice low, her sentences short. Pace listened, nodded, said nothing. He had moved past fear into a kind of numb acceptance, his body following Sarah's lead while his mind retreated to somewhere safer. Storage room E was on the basement level, at the opposite end from the housekeeping break room. Getting there meant navigating the entire length of the basement, past utility rooms and storage areas and God knew what else. It also meant trusting that the men searching for them had not discovered the same tunnel that Martinez had described. They descended quickly, Max leading the way, his nose working overtime to detect any threats before they materialized. The stairwell emptied into the east side of the basement, a corridor of bare concrete and exposed pipes that felt miles removed from the luxury above. Sarah checked her watch. 15 minutes until Martinez triggered the alarm. 15 minutes to find the tunnel and break through the wall. Storage room E was marked by a faded placard and a door that creaked when Sarah pushed it open. The room beyond was cluttered with abandoned furniture, old fixtures, and the detritus of multiple renovations. Dust covered everything, disturbed only by their footsteps as they picked their way through the maze of junk. The back wall was newer than the others, a patch of drywall and concrete block that stood out against the original brick. Sarah examined it quickly, identifying the weakest points, formulating a plan of attack. She handed Pace the flashlight. "Hold this steady. I need to see what I'm doing." The first blow of the hammer echoed through the room like a gunshot. Sarah winced, but did not stop. Speed was more important than silence now. Every second that passed was a second closer to discovery, a second closer to the alarm that would change everything. The drywall gave way easily, revealing the concrete blocks behind. These were more stubborn, but not insurmountable. Sarah alternated between the hammer and the pry bar, chipping away at the mortar, loosening blocks, creating an opening inch by painstaking inch. Max stood guard at the door, his body tense, his ears swiveling to catch every sound. Twice he alerted to movement in the corridor outside, and twice Sarah paused her work, weapon drawn, ready to fight. Both times the threat passed without incident. Patrols moving through, searching, not stopping. 10 minutes. The hole in the wall was big enough to see through now, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. The air that wafted through was stale and musty, untouched for years, but it smelled like freedom. 5 minutes. Sarah had widened the opening enough for a person to squeeze through, though it would be a tight fit. She turned to Pace. "You first. Get through and wait on the other side." He hesitated, looking at the dark maw of the tunnel, at the unknown that waited beyond. Then he nodded, handed her the flashlight, and began to work his way through the opening. His suit caught on jagged edges, tore, but he did not stop. In less than a minute, he was through, his voice calling back to her. "It's clear. The tunnel goes for maybe 50 feet, then there's another wall." Another wall. Another obstacle. But they had come too far to turn back now. Sarah checked her watch. 2 minutes until the alarm. She motioned for Max to go through the opening, and the dog obeyed without hesitation, his lean body slipping through the gap with ease. Then she followed, pulling herself through, ignoring the scrape of concrete against her arms, the dust that filled her nose and mouth. The tunnel was narrow and low, forcing them to crouch as they moved. Pipes ran along the ceiling, ancient and corroded, remnants of a building that no longer existed. Sarah used the flashlight sparingly, conserving battery, navigating more by feel than by sight. They reached the far wall just as the fire alarm erupted. The sound was muffled by distance and concrete, but still audible, a wailing siren that would be deafening in the upper floors. Sarah allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. Martinez had come through. Now chaos would reign, and in chaos there was opportunity. The wall ahead was similar to the one they had breached, drywall over concrete block, a barrier meant to separate rather than defend. Sarah attacked it with renewed vigor, her arms aching, her lungs burning, her determination unwavering. The alarm covered the sound of her blows, a symphony of destruction that masked her escape. Minutes passed, the hole grew, and then, finally, she broke through into a space beyond. It was a basement storage area, similar to the one they had left, but clearly belonging to a different building. Old furniture, abandoned equipment, the forgotten remnants of businesses that had come and gone. Sarah widened the hole enough for them to pass, then helped Pace through, followed by Max. They emerged into a corridor that led to a flight of stairs, which led to a ground-floor lobby that was empty and dark. The building appeared to be some kind of commercial office space, vacant judging by the dust and the for-lease signs in the windows. Sarah moved to the front door and peered out at the street. Peachtree was chaos. Fire trucks had arrived at the Avalon Grand, their lights painting the buildings in alternating red and white. Guests were streaming out of the hotel, some in robes, some in hastily donned clothes, all of them confused and frightened. Police cars were beginning to appear, responding to the alarm, adding to the pandemonium. In the midst of that chaos, 2 figures and a dog slipping out of a neighboring building would attract no attention at all. "Stay close," Sarah said. "We're going to walk, not run. Normal pace. Don't look back." They emerged onto the sidewalk and merged with the growing crowd of spectators. No one gave them a second glance. Sarah guided Pace away from the hotel, around the corner, down a side street where her car waited, untouched, exactly where she had left it. She unlocked the doors and helped Pace into the back seat, then opened the rear door for Max. The dog jumped in, his tail wagging for the first time all night, his tongue lolling in what could only be described as a grin. Even he knew they had made it. Sarah slid behind the wheel and started the engine. As she pulled away from the curb, she allowed herself one glance in the rearview mirror. The Avalon Grand was receding behind them, its elegant facade surrounded by emergency vehicles, its secrets exposed to the harsh light of investigation. But this was only the beginning. The evidence was safe, a small USB drive in her pocket that contained enough proof to bring down a senator and expose a network of corruption that had operated in Atlanta for decades. But evidence alone was not enough. It needed to reach the right hands, people who could not be bought, who could not be intimidated, who would see justice done regardless of the consequences. Sarah drove through the empty streets of early morning Atlanta, the sky beginning to lighten in the east, the city stirring toward another day. Beside her, Pace had slumped against the seat, exhaustion finally claiming him, his breathing deep and regular. In the back, Max had curled up, his head resting on his paws, his eyes closed but his ears still alert, still listening, still ready. She thought about who she could trust. Detective Warren was one name, a man she had worked with on several cases, a man who had shown backbone when others had folded. There were a few others, scattered through the department, people who still believed that the badge meant something beyond a paycheck and a pension. It would be enough to start. But she also knew that Morrison and his allies would not go quietly. They had resources, connections, the ability to make problems disappear. They would come for her, for Pace, for anyone who threatened their empire. The fight was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning. Sarah reached down and touched the USB drive through the fabric of her jacket. Such a small thing, such enormous implications. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a text from an unknown number. 4 words that made her blood run cold. "We know who you are." She stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it and kept driving. Let them know. Let them come. She had faced worse odds and survived. She had Max beside her, the best partner any officer could ask for. And she had the truth, a weapon more powerful than any gun, more dangerous than any threat. The sun crested the horizon as Sarah pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city. She needed coffee, needed food, needed a few minutes to think before the next phase began. She woke Pace gently and helped him out of the car, then clipped Max's leash to his harness. Inside the diner, a tired waitress showed them to a booth near the back, away from the windows, away from prying eyes. Sarah ordered coffee for herself and Pace, water for Max, and a full breakfast that neither of them would probably finish. But the ritual of normalcy was important. It reminded her that there was still a world outside the shadows, still people living ordinary lives, still something worth fighting for. Pace stirred sugar into his coffee with shaking hands. What happens now? Now we build a case. The evidence on that drive is a starting point, but we need more. Testimony, documentation, corroboration. We need to identify everyone in Morrison's network, from the bottom to the top, and we need to do it carefully, quietly, without tipping our hand until we're ready to strike. That could take months, years. Maybe, but it's the only way to make sure they don't wriggle out of it. Men like Morrison have escaped justice their whole careers because people rushed, because evidence was mishandled, because witnesses got scared and disappeared. We're not going to make those mistakes. Max had settled under the table, his head resting on Sarah's foot, his eyes half closed. But she knew he was not truly asleep. He was recharging, conserving energy, preparing for whatever came next. They were the same in that way. The waitress brought their food, and Sarah ate mechanically, her mind racing through possibilities and pitfalls. She would need to bring in Warren today, show him the evidence, get him on board. She would need to find a safe place for Pace, somewhere Morrison's people could not reach him. She would need to watch her own back, her own colleagues, her own department, because the rot in this city went deeper than she had ever imagined. But she would do it, one step at a time, one piece of evidence at a time, one arrest at a time, because that was what cops did. That was what she had sworn to do when she put on the badge, and no senator, no criminal organization, no army of hired thugs was going to stop her. After breakfast, Sarah drove to a location she knew well, a small cabin outside the city, owned by an aunt who spent most of the year in Florida. It was private, secure, off the grid in every way that mattered. She settled Pace there with strict instructions to stay inside, to contact no one, to wait for her return. Then she drove to the precinct. The Atlanta Police Department headquarters was already humming with activity when she arrived, despite the early hour. News of the incident at the Avalon Grand had spread, and officers were gathering in clusters, discussing, speculating, wondering. Sarah moved through them without stopping, her face neutral, her purpose clear. Detective James Warren was at his desk, a mountain of paperwork before him, a cup of cold coffee forgotten at his elbow. He looked up when Sarah approached, his eyes narrowing, reading the tension in her posture. "Collins, you look like hell." "I feel worse. We need to talk, somewhere private." Warren studied her for a moment, then nodded and rose. "Interview room 3 is empty. Follow me." The interview room was small and sterile, with a table bolted to the floor and chairs designed for discomfort. Sarah closed the door behind them and activated the recording system, not to document their conversation, but to mask it. The white noise would make eavesdropping difficult. "This better be good," Warren said, settling into a chair. "I've got 3 open homicides and a captain breathing down my neck." Sarah placed the USB drive on the table between them. "It's better than good. It's the beginning of the end for David Morrison." Warren's expression shifted, curiosity replacing irritation. He listened as Sarah laid out everything: the call from Pace, the footage, the assault on the hotel, the escape through the forgotten tunnel. By the time she finished, his face had gone pale. "You're sure about this? Morrison has been in office longer than I've been alive. He's untouchable." "No one is untouchable, not with evidence like this. But I need help, Warren. I can't do this alone. And I don't know who else to trust. The men who came after us had inside information. They knew Pace had made a copy. They knew I was coming. Someone in this department is feeding them intelligence." Warren was silent for a long moment, staring at the USB drive as if it might bite him. Then he reached out and took it, turning it over in his fingers. "I know some people. Feds, mostly. Bureau guys who hate corruption more than they hate paperwork. If this evidence is as solid as you say, they'll take it and run with it." "It's solid, but we need to move fast. Morrison will know by now that we escaped. He'll be scrambling to cover his tracks, to silence anyone who might talk. Every hour we wait is an hour he uses to build his defenses." Warren nodded and stood. "Give me 2 hours. I'll make some calls, set up a meeting. In the meantime, keep your head down and your dog close. If they're watching anyone, they're watching you." Sarah rose as well. "I can handle myself." "I know you can, but this isn't a meth lab raid, Collins. These people have resources we can barely imagine. Be careful." He left the room with the USB drive. And Sarah stood alone in the silence, feeling the weight of what she had set in motion. There was no turning back now. The wheels were in motion, the pieces were moving, and the outcome was far from certain. She found Max waiting in the hallway outside, his handler from the K9 unit standing nearby with a concerned expression. "Lieutenant, dispatch said you signed out last night but never signed back in. Everything okay?" Sarah managed a smile. "Everything's fine. Just a long night. Come on, Max. Let's go home." But home would have to wait. As Sarah walked through the precinct parking lot, her phone buzzed again. Another text from an unknown number. The hotel was just the beginning. Check your mailbox. She stopped, staring at the message. Max stood beside her, sensing her tension, his body shifting into alert mode. Slowly, she walked to her car and checked the mailbox mounted on the building's exterior, the one used for interdepartmental communications. Inside was a single envelope, unmarked, unsealed. She opened it and withdrew a photograph. It showed her cabin, the one where she had left Pace just hours ago, the one that was supposed to be safe. On the back, written in neat block letters, "Tick-tock, Lieutenant." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She was already running toward her car, Max bounding beside her, before her conscious mind caught up with her body. The engine roared to life, tires squealed against asphalt, and they were racing through the streets of Atlanta toward the outskirts, toward the cabin, toward whatever horror waited there. The drive took 20 minutes. It felt like 20 years. Sarah pushed the car to its limits, weaving through traffic. Ignoring honking horns and angry gestures, her focus narrowed to a single point. If they had hurt Pace, if they had silenced the one witness who could corroborate the evidence, everything would fall apart. The cabin came into view around a bend in the road, its rustic facade unchanged, no sign of disturbance visible from the outside. Sarah pulled to a stop and was out of the car before the engine died, her weapon drawn, Max released from his harness and ranging ahead to scout the perimeter. The front door was locked, just as she had left it. She used her key, pushed through, and swept the interior with practiced efficiency. Kitchen clear, living room clear, bedroom. Pace was there, sitting on the bed, his face pale but unharmed. Sitting across from him, in a chair pulled up close, was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. She wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary, and she held herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to power. "Lieutenant Collins," the woman said, her voice smooth and cultured. "I was wondering when you would arrive. Please put away your weapon. We have much to discuss." Sarah did not lower her gun. "Who are you?" "My name is Victoria Ashworth. I'm a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice, and I've been building a case against David Morrison for 3 years. Mr. Pace and I have been having a very productive conversation about how our evidence might complement each other." Sarah's mind raced. Ashworth. She had heard the name vaguely in connection with high-profile corruption cases on the East Coast. A reputation for being incorruptible, for taking on cases that others considered untouchable. "How did you know about Pace? How did you know about the cabin?" Ashworth smiled. "I have my sources, Lieutenant, just as you have yours. The important thing is that we're on the same side. Morrison and his network have been a cancer on this state for decades. I have witnesses, financial records, surveillance. What I lacked was direct evidence of his meetings with organized crime. Your Mr. Pace has provided that." Slowly, Sarah lowered her weapon but did not holster it. "The messages I received, the photograph of this cabin, that was you? Dramatic, perhaps, but effective. I needed to ensure you would come quickly, before anyone else could intercept you. The people protecting Morrison have eyes everywhere, including in your department. Meeting at the precinct was out of the question." Sarah felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders, replaced by a cautious hope. If Ashworth was genuine, if her resources and evidence could combine with what they had gathered, Morrison's empire might actually fall. "What's the plan?" Ashworth rose, smoothing her jacket. "The plan is to coordinate our efforts. I have a grand jury convening in 3 days. With the footage Mr. Pace provided, combined with the testimony and documentation I've assembled, we can secure indictments against Morrison and at least a dozen of his associates. But the window is narrow. Morrison has friends who will try to delay, to discredit, to destroy. We need to move fast and decisively. And me? What's my role in this? Your role, Lieutenant, is to stay alive. You've made powerful enemies tonight. Morrison knows your face, your name, your habits. Until the indictments are sealed, you're a target. I've arranged for a security detail, federal marshals who answer only to me. They'll keep you safe until this is over. Sarah shook her head. I'm not hiding. If there's work to be done, I want to be part of it. Ashworth studied her for a moment, then nodded with what might have been respect. Very well. Then you'll work with my team. We have witnesses to interview, evidence to catalogue, testimony to prepare. It will be grueling work, but I suspect you're not afraid of that. No, ma'am, I'm not. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Sarah worked alongside Ashworth's team, reviewing documents, conducting interviews, piecing together the vast puzzle of Morrison's corruption. The evidence was staggering. Decades of bribes, backroom deals, alliances with criminals who would have otherwise been his sworn enemies. Morrison had built an empire in plain sight, protected by the very institutions that should have held him accountable. Through it all, Max was by her side. He lay in the corner of conference rooms while Sarah pored over files, walked beside her during breaks when she needed fresh air, slept at the foot of her bed in the secure hotel where Ashworth's team was housed. His presence was a constant reassurance, a reminder that no matter how deep the corruption went, there was still loyalty and trust in the world. On the morning of the grand jury hearing, Sarah woke before dawn. She dressed in her best suit, pinned her badge to her jacket, and stood before the mirror for a long moment. The woman who looked back at her was tired, strained, but unbroken. Whatever happened today, she had done everything she could. Ashworth met her in the lobby, flanked by federal marshals. Ready? Ready. The courthouse was a fortress of security, federal agents at every entrance, bomb-sniffing dogs patrolling the perimeters. News of the impending indictments had leaked somehow, and reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing, questions shouted. Sarah kept her head down and pushed through, Max at her heel, until they were inside the relative sanctuary of the building. The grand jury room was surprisingly small, filled with ordinary citizens who had been selected to weigh evidence and determine whether charges should be brought. Sarah had testified before grand juries many times, but never for stakes this high. She took a breath, steadied herself, and entered. The testimony lasted 6 hours. Sarah described the call from Pace, the assault on the hotel, the evidence they had gathered. The footage was shown, faces identified, connections explained. Ashworth presented her own witnesses, former associates who had turned, whistleblowers who had come forward, victims who had finally found the courage to speak. By the end, the case was overwhelming. The grand jury retired to deliberate, and Sarah stepped out into the hallway to wait. Max pressed against her leg, sensing her exhaustion, offering what comfort he could. She ran her fingers through his fur and allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. We did good, boy. Whatever happens now, we did good. The deliberation took less than an hour. When the foreperson emerged with the sealed indictments, Ashworth's face broke into a rare smile. 37 counts, racketeering, bribery, conspiracy, money laundering. The list went on and on. David Morrison was arrested that evening, led out of his Atlanta mansion in handcuffs, while cameras recorded every moment. His expression was one of disbelief, as if the rules that had protected him for so long had suddenly ceased to apply. And in a way, they had. The empire he had built was crumbling, brought down by a night manager with a conscience, a prosecutor with patience, and a K-9 officer who refused to look the other way. The weeks that followed were chaotic, more arrests, more revelations, more dominoes falling as Morrison's network collapsed. Some of his allies tried to negotiate, offering testimony in exchange for leniency. Others fled, only to be tracked down by federal agents who had no tolerance for corruption. Sarah returned to her regular duties, but nothing felt quite regular anymore. She was a minor celebrity now, her name in the papers, her face on the news. The attention was uncomfortable, but it came with unexpected benefits. Officers who had once looked at her with suspicion now approached her with respect. The cold shoulders warmed. The isolation ended. On a quiet evening 2 months after the grand jury, Sarah sat on the porch of her apartment, watching the sun set over Atlanta. Max lay beside her, his head on her lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. The city spread out before them, its towers catching the golden light, its streets beginning to glow with the artificial luminescence of night. Her phone rang. She answered without checking the screen. "Collins." "Lieutenant, it's Warren. Just wanted to let you know. Morrison's lawyer filed another motion today, trying to suppress the hotel footage. Judge denied it in about 10 minutes. Looks like the trial is going forward on schedule." Sarah smiled, and good to hear. "And Collins, there's something else. The commissioner called me today, asked about you. I think there might be a promotion in your future." "I'm happy where I am, Warren. I've got the best partner on the force. Why would I want to change that?" Warren laughed. "Fair enough. Take care of yourself, Collins. And give Max a treat for me." She hung up and looked down at the dog, who'd been through everything with her. 7 years of partnership, countless cases, and now this, the biggest takedown of her career, made possible by his instincts and loyalty. "What do you say, Max? Ready for the next one?" The dog lifted his head, his amber eyes meeting hers, his tail wagging slowly. Whatever the next challenge might be, they would face it together. That was the only certainty she needed. The night settled over Atlanta, and Sarah Collins sat with her partner, watching the city she had sworn to protect. Somewhere out there, criminals were plotting. Corruption was spreading and injustice was festering, but somewhere out there, too, were people like Richard Pace and Elena Martinez, ordinary citizens who refused to look away. People who believed that courage was contagious and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, would always find its way to light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, for just a few hours, Sarah allowed herself to rest. She had earned it. They both had. The story of Morrison's fall would be told and retold in the years to come, in courtrooms, in classrooms, in the quiet conversations of officers who still believed in what the badge represented. It would become legend, a reminder that no one was truly above the law, that power could be challenged, that justice, though slow, was not impossible. But for Sarah, the story was simpler. It was about a phone call in the night, a choice to act, and a partner who never let her down. It was about the moments when fear screamed retreat and she chose to advance anyway. It was about the thin blue line that separated order from chaos and the responsibility she bore to walk it with integrity. Max stretched and yawned, then settled back into his comfortable position, his body warm against her leg. The night sounds of Atlanta played around them, distant traffic, a siren wailing somewhere in the city, the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Normal sounds, safe sounds, the sounds of a city that, for all its flaws, was still worth fighting for. Sarah closed her eyes and let the peace of the moment wash over her. The fight was far from over. It would never truly be over, but tonight the good guys had won, and that was enough. That was everything.